I own the Welsh version of Google, and I redesigned
I am
it where
the Welsh version of Google.
I am Welsh Google.
I am
Iron Man.
Don't be a doorstop. Don't be a doorstop. Don't be a doorstop.
Welcome to 2024. I hope you've missed us because we've missed you. Yeah, so we've entered a new year. We're into January. We've taken a bit of a break, probably off the end of back last year and into this year. That's why we're a little bit late in arriving, but we are here nonetheless. We have been busy. Tom, what have you been up to coming into 2024, and maybe some thoughts on your exit of 2023?
What have I been up to? I feel like nothing and everything all at once, basically. So
I think you also forget everything as soon as somebody asks you as well, right? As soon as you get asked, you're like, what happened, when, and how? Yeah.
I think for me, it's starting off creating a Ryland Studio as a brand. So sort of branching out of Ryland Consulting, which you run, to run my own. So trying to push social media, videography, UX design, and coaching a lot more. So being more in line with what's on my heart and building up a vision and habits in regarding to do that. So that's what I've been doing. I'm messing about with trying to find what apps, so to-do app, making the most of that to get my tasks done, but then also found a really good habit tracker that I'm having a go of the free version at the moment, just to get into good habits from a fitness and health and journaling and something else. I've already forgotten it. Habits, which is good.
For those of you that have never heard us mention the To-Do app, although I think a working title should be One Task, because it's one task at a time. So Tom designed an app, I built the app, and it's a to-do list, which only focuses on showing you one task at a time. Even though you might have many tasks, you can add them all in, but it will only show you one at a time. And then once you complete that task, if you complete that task, it gives you like a reward system where you select one of your designated rewards, as in you've defined those rewards. So whether or not it's go and make a cup of tea or go for a walk or go and get yourself a snack or something, because that reward-based kind of like flow or system, it is the most effective process.
Rewarding.
And yeah, the most rewarding route. And also I think what helps is it means that you don't need to worry about what's next, because the screen, like it is like an overtake of the screen. So you only see the reward. And then once you click done, it then shows you the next task. So you can actually feel like you've kind of like done something good, reward yourself. You don't need to worry about the next task. Then when you're ready for the next task, you can click into it. So I'm still waiting for our first 5-star review, but we've definitely had some good feedback, because I use it a lot and Kimmy uses it a lot and really enjoys it. So, and you use it a lot as well, so which is good to show. See, for me, I've been upgrading my setup. I finally bought an actual decent chair, which has a decent like headrest. It actually has a footrest as well, which is bizarre, but I'd have to like lean back a little bit to be able to use it. And I've obviously got some new lighting, so I'm now green on green on green to all make my eyes pop. And I think I've been thinking a lot about, like different strategies and different things you want to take into the new year. So I've not bothered with New Year's resolutions this time. I just want like a vibe, a feeling, like a flow, which is much more like kind of like a healthy flow of work and creativity and motivation. Because a lot of the time you'll do something and the motivation is quite hard to create. You'll run on it, and then when it drops, because you hit a hard kind of like bug or something difficult, it's very hard to come back to it. So go off and do something else that's motivating and inspiring, and then come back to it. So like some of those things that I've done. So obviously inside Spotify meets Patreon music app is mainly my thing that I'm working on the most. And I was a bit like demotivated to carry on working on it because it's just a lot of detail because I'm redesigning it. So I went off and redesigned my Google.com. So for those of you that don't know, I own the Welsh version of Google, and I redesigned it where
the Welsh version of Google.
I am Welsh Google.
I am
I am Iron Man. I basically redesigned it where I now can search using my own search, and it is in Welsh. It's partial because not all search results come back in Welsh. So that's been great. And that's spelled gwgl.cymru, C-Y-M-R-U. It's always difficult to spell when you're like trying to speak at the same time. So that's been good fun. And I created a Mabinogion thing, which is essentially like medieval tales and stories that are like I think they're probably some of the oldest medieval tales in the UK or something like that. So yeah, I've just been like scratching my own itch, which has been good. And then some other things I've been thinking about is dealing with negativity. Now, I'll front load it. So I think dealing with negativity, there's three things you've got to realize. The energy that it takes, the fear of those negative people being disowned keeps you in that group, and also the guilt of, oh, you couldn't hack it, or you couldn't put up with it, of being in that negative group. Those three pillars are the things that either keep you in that group, or like other people will tell you why you should stay in that group. So that's basically the front loading, but I'll break it down. So if you're in a group of negative people, or there's people sharing, have either a negative mindset or they share negative stories a lot. I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be empathetic, but typically what will happen is that's quite draining, because you'll use a lot of energy to either encourage them or kind of like be able to listen and engage with them. And if you are in a negative space yourself, you might find it difficult because it might be a sense of being dragged down with those individuals or individual. But if you're trying to stay in a positive space, we all know that like motivation takes a lot of energy to keep going, and that kind of like drive. And if you're trying to aspire to something bigger than yourself, it requires a lot of energy. So your energy spent kind of like around negative people and managing and coping yourself with detaching from negative stories or negative things, is quite sapping. And it's better sometimes to utilize that energy in yourself, right? To keep being positive for your own benefit. So that's like one thing. The second thing is like, typically when you get advice around negative people and negative groups, a friend might be like, oh, like, but just learn how to detach from the negative stories or the negative mindsets and stuff, right? And typically that friend is advising that because they can visualize themselves as the negative person and doesn't want to be disowned. AKA, if I happen to be negative or have a negative mindset or have a period of negativity, I wouldn't want you to disown me because I'm high energy. Therefore, I will project that, no, Tom, you should stick out with the negativity that is Dan, kind of thing, because I'm projecting the fear of being disowned in that situation, rather than thinking, how could I elevate myself to also be kind of a positive mindset, of positivity, right? The tongue has power of life and death, speaking good things and positive things. Again, this doesn't mean that you're not empathetic, and it doesn't mean that it's kind of like for seasons. It's more so like prolonged negativity, right? And groups that kind of like tear you down, as it were. And then the third thing, I think there's sometimes when you are advised, oh, I'm with this negative group, or there's a proportion of the group is negative, or a particular relationship is negative, you'll be advised to kind of like stick at it and stay, either because that's Christian doctrine, or because like, oh, it's the good thing to do, like morale wise, and like, oh, well, you shouldn't disown them. It's a good thing to do and stick out, and it's good to do that. What I would say is sometimes there's guilt of being perceived as like, oh, you couldn't hack it, or you couldn't kind of like, you couldn't cope. And that could be an external opinion that you fear. If you do leave that group or leave that relationship or leave that individual that happens to be negative, somebody might say, oh, you couldn't hack it, or you weren't good enough. And that like basically guilt keeps you trapped. So I've basically been thinking, generally coaches or mentors will advise you to change your mindset in the group, right? They'll be like, oh, all I can control is Tom. Therefore, if I tell Tom, hey, just detach from the negativity and recognize that they're telling a story and that's okay. You don't need to like embody that negativity for yourself. But I would say what's almost like braver to say is like, hey, maybe you should not be around that person and use your energy, because it's a finite amount of energy, just somewhere else in a better group, in a better situation that's better. So I'm like typically coaches will say, hey, change your like thoughts and your mindset and your perspective. But I'm like, in this case, you should probably just change your environment. And that's like a risky thing, because that's perceived as like, you're disowning them, or you're like letting them, you're failing them or whatever. And I'm like, we're talking to not like a horrific situation of like, somebody in need and you're disowning. We're not talking about the extremes, right? We're talking about generally day-to-day friendships and things. And when somebody's like broadly has a negative like tilt or a pessimistic tilt, it's in those circumstances. So I'm like, it's funny how I've become comfortable and not projecting myself as the person that could be negative that one time, and then you're going to disown me. So I can be like, yeah, maybe you should find another group of individuals that do build you up and do encourage you, because if you want to aspire to be this big thing or do this thing, it takes a lot of energy. So to focus on that. So I thought if you had any thoughts or any ads, any perspective on that.
Yeah, I think a bit of a mix. So I think I'd probably start with the mindset thing, but then put boundaries in place that if it's a reoccurring event, because I guess you're doing the assumption in this story that it has been a reoccurring event for X amount of months, days, years, or whatever. But I think if I was stepping into someone and I didn't know them, I'd do the assumption that it might not be reoccurring. It could be a one-off thing. So how do you build boundaries to, build your mindset, but then being like, okay, now it's going into the territory of they're like stuck in a rut to some extent, and they would need the counseling or coaching, or maybe they just like the drama attached to it from a attachment styles or something else that might be sort of kicking off in the meantime. Which is interesting. But it's very tough with those types of topics, because there's so much knocking around in our brains, from our personality to our passions to our energy levels to finances to families to friends, and you sort of, I guess the more you dive into it, the more you don't really know which one's kicking about unless that individual knows specifically and can reflect on it. It's quite hard to pinpoint it, or they might not even know what's going on, and it's just the chaos of everything that is kicking off that they only know how to verbalize it, but not then process it and move through it or out of it.
There's loads of nuance, isn't there?
An evangelist of their own drama to some extent, or chaos, which is tough on some people, because some people just want that extra bit of help or listening ear, and then they'll thrive. And then others, that listening ear, they thrive off the attention, so are more likely to build up the drama. Because I've been in an old job role that someone was threatening to commit suicide, and it was just because everyone would basically drop what they're doing and give full attention to that individual. So then it was reinforcing, well, if I do this, I'll get what I want, basically. So it's a difficult one, adding boundaries, because then you're also, are you playing with life in your brain when someone threatens that? And to some extent you have to go, well, I'm not in control of if they commit their suicide or not. I've created boundaries, I've given them structure, I've given them phone numbers or whatever, and they can't sort of bleed you dry to some extent, which is easy to do if you don't spot who they are, I guess.
I think there's a bunch of nuance there, but if we take it like the key thing is kind of recognizing that, what are they crying for? But I would say if we move away from the most extreme versions, which is your example, I would say sometimes there are cases when somebody is kind of like being enabled by the attention that you give them. And therefore, if you step away, they will build their own coping mechanism rather than always having to rely on an external coping mechanism, and being able to internalize that kind of support mechanism for themselves. And again, somebody would label it as enabling. And again, not in the most extreme versions that you kind of like were referring to, but in the kind of more lighter versions where somebody is kind of like acting out for attention or whatever, then you're able to step away from that. In the end, things do work out. And I guess it's the optimism and optimism that you are not God. Therefore, you can't control people, and have this optimism of their situation, that their situation will work out. And it comes back to what you said, I think, last year, which is like, you'll change when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing.
Yeah.
And it's at that moment that, and if you're enabling that the pain never gets bad enough for somebody, then maybe they'll never change. And is it a case of actually stepping away from individuals in a real kind of like respectful way can then enable them to like go forward? But I guess we're talking about two types of individuals. I'm more so referring to somebody that wants to go out there and get it, right? And being dragged back by negative opinions or negative individuals rather than people that have particular issues or are going through tough times and you're there as a support mechanism to them, kind of thing. It is very interesting. I think something else that I've been thinking about, do you remember the Gladiators?
Coming hot today.
Yeah,
I do remember Gladiators.
Got to start this new year with off with a bang. I mean, it's all about the Green Power Ranger over here. I feel like when the Power Rangers like it's morphin' time, and it just goes into their like singular views. I feel like you need to have your like yellow color scheme as you're like it's morphin' time. So, but yeah, my Gladiators. Have you seen it, or do you remember watching it as a kid?
Yes, remember watching it as a kid. Not seen the latest version that came out recently.
So I watched the latest version. Then I was like, oh, this is really cool that they brought it back. I didn't realize it was an American thing to begin with. I always thought it was in the UK and UK by design. But there's a documentary on Netflix about it. And some things that have like jumped out to me is like, again, I'll front load it. Move before you're ready. And messy progress is the best type of progress. So they're starting off this like TV show and they're putting together this, stitching up this like TV show about like fitness of like strong people, and you compete against these strong people. So we need to find these strong people, and they're formulating gladiators, right? And it's called the American Gladiator. So they're formulating this stuff. So they go to this park and they get these people to try out, and people aren't very good, or some people are good, and they're like, right, they pick out their gladiators. Then they put on the show. Now the show itself was like just a pilot to get financing to do a full like 12 episodes, 16 episodes or whatever. And what they found was they were doing it so ropey that the outfits were just like like NFL undergarments, like NFL padding underneath your actual like I don't know what you would call it, but underneath your actual pads you have these like sponge pads. So they were, these American like gladiators were wearing those like the underpads and stuff like this, like collecting anything you can find to put it together, to have it this thing. And then the games that they put together, the guy was just like sketching games and coming up with games. They didn't really understand how they were going to play out and how they would work. And one of them was like, somebody's on this rope swing and they swing towards you and you're on a platform with like a rugby pad, and you basically have to just not get knocked off. So the gladiators on with the rugby pad on the platform, the singular platform, and it's the contestant that's swinging towards them, and they would get absolutely booted off. One guy like got smacked, like he had a concussion because he like kneed himself in the face and like cut himself. And it's like this like health and safety stuff kind of like didn't really exist. They learned while they were doing it. It was so ropey that that people were getting injured and all sorts of stuff. The costumes were a bit patchy. The games that they were playing were a bit patchy, and they ended up doing like fitness people versus the gladiators. So it was kind of equal. So some people were like willing to like rugby tackle people. So one guy, when he's swinging, he actually like leads with his shoulder into the gladiator. So it's like this messy progress. And obviously the gladiators are taking the hits, but the producers are kind of like, don't know what they're doing. They're throwing it together. But just imagine it like, and I think at some point it was probably that like, oh, this isn't very good. Just imagine if it stopped, it wouldn't have become the kind of the massive franchise that it is today, so much so that they can reignite it later on. Yeah. So I thought the messiness of it gives me inspiration to, basically like move before you're ready. Don't wait for that perfection thing, which is something that we've said before. And messy progress is a good thing. They then like halfway, I think they did manage to get funding for an actual full like season or series. And then as they were doing it, it was better, but it wasn't great. So like they were refining things, but still the safety aspect wasn't good. So people were getting injured and so forth. And then halfway through it, they changed I think they changed the producer or changed it up, and they like Americanized it, and they had like proper costumes and all the rest of it that were like much more like red, white, and blue. And they changed the games to be more creative and more like kind of like safe. So one of them was, you know, that jousting thing? They used to have it on a full platform. And what happened is in the middle, it's safe. But if you push the player back, it had a trapdoor. So each side had a trapdoor. Now, as you're pushing it back, the gladiator might also fall on the trapdoor that he's pushed you towards and stuff. So like it was super unsafe. And it was this like game show guy was like, oh, we should do it on one single platform. And it became loads safer. Now, it's not every day that you're basically playing with the safety of people. And today we would be much better. Like for the first iteration would be much better. But it just gives you encouragement that you can kind of like put something together that's quite ropey. Halfway through season 1, they decide to pivot, essentially like clean it up and make it a bit more like special. And they introduced like head cameras because they had this guy that was very good. I'm not sure if he came from the sporting world or something, but he wanted to kind of make it more exciting. So he had all of these people with like all the contestants with head cameras, so you could feel what it would be like to fight against these gladiators. And also they kind of brought average Joes like lawyer, secretary, kind of like housewife, cleaner, you know, like bin man, policeman, and brought those people that typically were smaller to contest against these gladiators. So I thought the whole journey of it was, or like the origin of it, is so fascinating. And it just takes somebody to be okay with the messy progress. Obviously, you've got to be careful when it comes to like, you know, health and safety and stuff. But like, taking that and applying it to our situations, like typically we're not in a health and safety situation, so you can be like more adventurous and more experimental with what you do. You know,
that's cool. Yeah, is that the Muscles and Mayhem?
Yes, yeah,
on Netflix. Yeah, I was just searching out just for anyone that wants to watch.
Yeah, so
Muscles and Mayhem.
Muscles and Mayhem.
5 episodes, roughly 40 to 45 minutes each.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think this whole like documentary information stuff is so insightful. Like, I'm not sure if we've mentioned the BlackBerry film about the BlackBerries with the phones. That is incredibly good to watch. I think that's in my top 10 again of these like business orientated things where people pivot or people like knuckle down or whatever they do is very insightful. And you've just got to remember that films are great because they kind of like condense years worth of hardships or innovations or whatever, right? Even documentaries, it condenses years worth of stuff. So it, of course, when it comes to applying to your own situation, you've still got to just take it every day, but you can just take every day with a sense of lightness or a better perspective and a sense of joy and a sense of ease rather than holding it tight, like trying to grasp sand, right? Just the tighter you grasp, the more it goes through your fingers in some ways. So,
yeah, BlackBerry's on Prime, but you still have to rent or buy it.
It's also come out on Apple TV as well. So
very nice.
So any other things that you've been working through or thinking about?
Just mainly building out the business and creating not only a client basis, but also just a product basis of things through coaching, videography, and sort of app design mainly and websites. So looking at how can I, with all my experiences, just be able to build stuff and just getting a bit more of a good routine of documenting things through the videography side, but also I could do a lot more trial and error because I know it's not hurting anyone else's brand. It's just building mine up and just the fun and games with it all, from doing TikToks of either me explaining UX stuff or doing stock motion things and seeing which lands. Is it the music? Is it the timing? Is it the posting? I've noticed with us, it's the stock motion that seems to bang quite a lot. So on TikTok and on YouTube, I think those are the best views that we've had on shorts, which is cool. So it's really interesting just being able to play with different ideas and see what, I guess, A, what you enjoy, and then B, what I guess other people enjoy of what you're posting up from an algorithmic point of view. But yeah, so it's planning out the future of how can you build something and make it last. Having your own stamp on it.
Yeah, aligned with what you were saying there of like the trial and error of like the experimental prototyping aspect. I think it's really important to like enjoy whatever level you're at, enjoy the level that you're at. So in your case, you're like, there's no ramifications if one video doesn't land or doesn't go too well. There's no ramifications if you accidentally say the wrong thing. You're not going to kind of like, you know, upset a bunch of people because they're like, you know, it's kind of like playing at the level. So you can be more experimental, more adventurous, more courageous. Whereas in other situations, it might be, oh, well, you can't say this because there's there's a sponsorship involved or there's a client involved or whatever. So for every level, of course, we're always progressing to new levels, but enjoying for this level, what does it mean you can do? And I think especially when it comes to public speaking or like a public character, like the person that you are, like as a public influencer or whatever, like get away with kind of like, and I don't mean like basically you're rude or upset people on purpose. It's like recognize there's way more capacity to fail in public, and it's a more forgiving environment. You can be a bit rougher. Whereas as you get more senior or more professional, those things still exist, but you will perceive them to not exist. You'll feel like you can't fail, but you can still fail. And that is actually like, if anything, it shows the best type of maturity and the best type of confidence, being at a senior level or a lead level or a owner level, and also being able to fail and be okay with failing, because it's a part of the journey, right? Failure is essential to the journey. AKA, if gladiators didn't allow those failures to kind of like happen and we're okay with those failures happening to some degree, then it wouldn't be the thing that we know it today. It's like The Simpsons, when you see the first ever drawing of Bart Simpson versus the drawing of him now, or even Homer or whoever, like the first rough version had to exist. So it's like, yeah, that's like the encouragement, I guess.
Because I think the thing that's helped me the most is the fact that I can fail and it doesn't affect anyone else's, I guess, reputation other than my own, because I sort of don't mind it. Because I think the one thing that being in the marketing world and dealing with social media whilst being dyslexic means that you're not very confident at posting things just in case you've spelt something wrong or done an error. And I think it's freed me to be like, actually, I'm just going to give me permission to get things wrong, say things wrong, spell things wrong, just to get into the habit of publishing stuff, to hit the, now you've published 100 items on a social website site, or you've edited 100 videos, or you've communicated about UX, because I'm not expecting this to be perfect, but actually I sort of want to get things out there because there's so much in my sort of brain that I want to do that it takes 10 times longer if I have to spell check everything and do everything perfect. And actually it sort of, to some extent, waters me down, because the skill set that I have might not be looking at everything word for word that someone else does have. But then you'll lose out on the whole creative video because I won't have the confidence of posting it up because of some sort of minor errors. So it sort of freed me up just to be like, actually, I'm just going to post. And if I get it wrong, I'll just remember to change it for next time, rather than deleting a post, reposting it, and creating more work for potentially 2 people to view it and actually one of them to only spot the error anyway.
I particularly, my personal gripe is about people spotting like spelling mistakes and stuff if they're just there to kind of pull you down. So it's kind of like, but just think of the positivity of the engagement of somebody coming to say, hey, you spelt this thing wrong, isn't it? Like, like privately it's fine to be told, but like publicly it's like, oh, great. But yeah, again, it's like it's the decision-making time, right? Of wanting to post something or wanting to say something, versus like the longer you leave it, the more friction it is, like the bigger the wall gets to kind of get over it, because if you overthink it. So it's trying to post something and not worry that there's mistakes, not worry that there's spelling mistakes, not worrying that there's a bit of like misunderstanding, because actually in the engagement following off that, you can explain it and correct and stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's trying to get social media to a place with your company or with my company of, it's as if you're having a bunch of banter with a bunch of guys that you probably will say the wrong thing and then they'll make fun of you. But when you do land that good comment or that funny quote or whatever, and everyone wets themselves, it's all worth it. But it's all sometimes about the pace of it but you will trip up in the meantime and say something wrong or misreference or mishear someone along the way.
I think along the lines of like being corrected, I was chatting with Kimmer about this, and my kind of like personal value is like everybody deserves to be like understood, right? Regardless of, you know, whether or not they communicate it well or not to some degree. And you'll have people that, for example, us, we might say something wrong or like grammatically incorrect in English, and somebody, typically an English person, will correct us. And then we'll be like, well, you only know one language. We know two languages badly, but at least we can speak two languages. So it's one of those things that sometimes you can go in on somebody to correct them. Whereas like they know multiple languages. It's one of those things, right? It's like they know more languages than you anyway. So it's like, it's fine. You know, can you speak two languages? No, you can't. So don't bother correcting his English.
That's a good note to end on. We'd rather speak in both languages.
Yeah, so come into the comments and correct our grammar.
Yeah.
And then our comeback will be, well, can you speak two languages? Or three if you speak a little bit of French from your French GCSE still.
Yeah, no, not me. I dropped it as quickly as I picked it up.
Great. Well, there you go. So basically, don't deal with negativity anymore. Enjoy the level that you're at. Enjoy messy progress and move before you're ready. And enjoy your start to your 2024. And until next time, keep hammering those nails.